many of the companies that you're going to find, at least in the PPP program, will be private companies, but there will be some that will be public, and the public companies will be the focus of the Edgar presentation, and the second part is how to background a private company. Mark Horvath just had some really great tips that he didn't steal my entire presentation, but he had many decent tips here, and I will give you a couple examples of how that whole process works. Okay, so again, here's the link to the presentation. I put it in chat. It's my book. I think you enjoy it if you had a chance to check it out. There are about 15,000 public companies, but 6 million firms are privately held. And so really a lot of the, the public companies it's a small subset. I went through the Small Business Administration list here, which you can pull up. And I think you guys might have done this already. This is the big spreadsheet, national spreadsheet of the Paycheck Protection Act recipients with 150,000 and above. And I built a presentation off that, finding a tech company in Little Rock that is struggling and so forth. One thing about SEC filings, you need to know that if you have a public company, and all public companies have to file with the Securities and Exchange Commission, public company would be traded on a stock exchange like NASDAQ or a New York Stock Exchange. And they have to file annual reports, and then they have to describe their executive pay, and these annual reports are proxy statements. And then they have to do periodic disclosures, and this is the concept under the federal law, to provide a level playing field for all investors. So if there's something big that's going to affect the company's future, they have to put it out in a filing. And this is where we can find our news. The database is called the Electronic Data Gathering, Analysis and Retrieval Database. I was actually at the AP when Edgar really went live back in, what was it, 1991? Dating myself horribly. The presentation here, I have these links that are hyperlinked in, and if you're using a Mac, you go Control and click for a new tab, and it brings up the link in a new tab. That way you can keep the presentation going and look at the tab, and that's the Edgar database. What this will do is it provides a portal for millions of filings and so forth. We are going to look at a company called Innovo, which is a Little Rock company. What I did is, after searching for the company, I found the ticker symbol. I put it in there. It's a quick way of figuring out the company and getting it to the right place. Here is the company, and then we have all of the filings here. What we have on this screen are the filing name, and there are a bunch of different types. And then you get the document here, and then a little description, and then when the filing date was, and the film number, and so forth. So I thought we'd just start off here with an annual report, and that's a 10K. And that one would have been filed, it looks like May 12th. So just bringing this up here. This brings up another screen that tells you that this is the main document is linked here. The XBRL, if you're really heavy into data, you can scrape XBRL. And bring it in and do some advanced financial analysis. And then we have various exhibits here. The exhibits are very important. They can be contracts and other major things. But let's just go to the main document first. And we bring that up here. And this is your typical, the 10K is equivalent to the annual report without all the groovy pictures, We see it's for the fiscal year ending for December 31st, 2019. And there's a little lag. It takes a while to compile this. It would usually be out about 2 months after the end of the fiscal year, sometimes longer. We have the address, zip code, and so forth. And in the table of contents here, we have, this is kind of a standard menu of things that you'd see in an annual report. The business is just going to give you the overview, the story about what is going on with this company. Really good, just if you've never, covered a particular company, just to sort of see what's going on. The risk factors are very important. There also can be some boring boilerplate, and there's a lot of ass covering in the risk factors. They want to name all sorts of risks from the, economic downturn or what have you, that may just be trying to prevent them getting sued in the event something happens. So properties can tell you the specific locations of operations, which can be very interesting. I'm always looking at legal proceedings. That is, there might be old lawsuits here, but there might be new ones. And legal proceedings can be a very informative place to find information about companies. You're not going to get a lot of detail about the suit in these filings, but you will find out where it's filed, what court, and then you can go to the court itself and figure it out. Mine safety disclosures is boilerplate. Selected financial data. It's usually old in a 10K report, and I'll discuss where you can find the more recent stuff. And then there's this thing called the management discussion and analysis of financial condition. It's a horrible name. It's boring, but what it is this is management's story about what is going on. It's their spin on the company's operations. And they're kind of constrained on spin in this document, because if they get a little bit too enthusiastic about things and it's misleading, they can get sued. So they have to be fairly careful about their shareholder communications here. So what I tell my students when reading about these things is the management discussion and analysis is the narrative that illustrates the financial data. So they work in conjunction. So if you're trying to figure out, why there is a particular expense, it's usually going to be spelled out in the management discussion and analysis. The disclosures about market risk isn't something that I usually dig into too much unless it's a big financial company. More supplementary data, controls and procedures. We have profiles of the officers and directors. One of the most important parts of any of these documents, because it's going to give you a sense of how wired in these executives are in other institutions in the community, and it might point the way for potential conflicts of interest. Executive pay is in here. I'll talk about that in a bit. And then, who is owning the company, that's security ownership, and so forth. Let me switch back to the presentation here. So I've just kind of given you a basic overview of an annual report, the 10K. The other documents that you want to pay attention to are the 8K forms. And the 8Ks are the breaking corporate news. So if there's something really big that's affecting a company that is could affect their ability to continue as a business, or it's something that could affect their market value, they're supposed to put out an announcement in an 8K form. So this could be everything from a quarterly earnings press release. It'll all come out, so you can get the most recent financial information in an 8K form. Or if there's something like really dramatic, like when Steve Jobs died, Apple filed an 8K. Their founder died, and it was like kind of an important thing for the future of the company, that Steve Jobs is no longer on the earth. So pay attention to the 8K filings. They're very, very good. The executive pay and conflicts of interest and insider dealings are provided in some level in the 10K form, and in great detail in this form, a proxy statement, which is called the DEF 14. You know, I didn't make up these form names. They're kind of ridiculous, but the proxy statement is going to give you a lot of detail about who's on the board, who's running the company, and then the executive pay details for the top officers. I'll go into that in a little bit. After the press release comes out on the quarterly earnings, you know, the companies have to describe how much they're making money every 3 months, right? They come ahead with a more formalized document called a 10Q, usually about 6 weeks after that announcement. And the quarterly report will have a little bit more detail. I used to look at the discrepancy when I covered Citibank between the press release and what they'd say in the quarterly report. And they were kind of sneaky, you know. They would put like all the bad stuff about the credit card business in the quarterly report and conveniently omit it in the press release. So it's good just to circle back to see if there's any additional embarrassing details that they didn't want to put in the press release. Could be in the 10Q. So not necessarily a breaking news strategy, but something to get some depth. In the annual report, you're going to find photos and executive bios. Also find that in the proxy statement. And the lawsuit summaries can be in the quarterly, annual, and periodic report. So what I did was I came across this Unovo company and went through their document. I'll just show you the sort of things that I found, just kind of randomly, you know, pulled this out of the air by looking through the spreadsheet of paycheck protection loans and kind of cross-referencing, you know, public companies and so forth. I'll describe how I did that here in a bit. This is a Little Rock tech company, and it got a $1.1 million paycheck protection loan. They said that this is going to keep 61 jobs, and this was all taken off the Paycheck Protection Act spreadsheet. Here is a image of the company here, and looking through the 10K, you know, again, I'm just sort of, you know, summarize what I've already covered up to this point, the context, the things that you should be looking for, the risk, what management supposedly fears, and beneficial owners, who calls the stocks. So in using like a 10K to build a story, what I found, the things I pulled out of it was that this is a technology company that's selling marketing of information. Its long-standing relationships are with Yahoo, Google, Microsoft Online, 64 full-time employees. And here is one thing that was kind of a key quote in the statement. Let me just pull it up here. Just keyword search for this thing. So in the risk factors section, they talk about some fairly important things. We have a history of losses, and our revenues have declined from 2019 to 2018. Not a great thing to be reporting during a tech boom, right? So we've been kind of a money-losing enterprise. And then they just lay it out here that the pandemic could have a material adverse impact on our business results, operations, and financial condition. This phrase, material adverse impact, is very important in securities law. It is a red flag that the company is struggling. And so when you see that, you know, you will know that there's something up, and I would pay close attention to trends in the financials, so forth. We go down to the next item here, and it gets worse. Our auditors have raised substantial doubts about our ability to continue as a going concern. At Dow Jones, if we saw this, we'd put out a headline immediately. This is a market-moving disclosure. It may not be a new disclosure in this document, but that's that's the sort of level of intensity that this warning will have. All public companies have to be audited. And when the auditor writes a letter that says that we doubt you're going to be able to stay in business, that's a big deal, because it takes some guts for an auditor to do that. And it's not a common event. So that was a significant thing. Then they go on, they talk about how they have an operating deficit, and that's increased. And then you just kind of like look at the business here. We're reliant on 2 customers for a significant portion of our revenues. So we have a company that's small, overly reliant on 2 tech firms for its business, 64% and 14% of its revenues. And they need to stay afloat by, we have to maintain a credit facility. Credit facility means that's a loan agreement, like a revolving loan. And if they did not have access to this loan agreement, then they could be out of business and so forth. Let's see, what else did I pick out here?
So Rob,
yeah.
I have a question came to me in chat from Jay at the Tampa Tribune.
Yeah.
Which financial documents are the best to search for federal, state, or other public loans or grants? Where's the first place to look?
The first place to look would be the 8K, and then the 10Q, and then the annual report. It just so happens that this annual report for this company fell at the time when this loan came through. So we get some detail about the loan. So yeah, I'd first start off with the most recent and then work your way back. So your periodic disclosure is 8K, 10Q, then 10K.
Okay.
So just kind of going through here, why is this company in trouble? They're going to see less advertising demand from the travel, leisure, and hospitality verticals. Well, this is, in terms of industries that are at risk in the pandemic, you can't get any worse than the travel and leisure and hospitality verticals. They're just getting friggin' hammered. So, those are, you can see how just extracting these little bits and looking in very specific areas of the document can, provide, a bit of a narrative to work from. So I kind of pulled out some of the main things. One of, just going down here further, it was kind of a sneaky thing on this form. They initially said, in terms of their financial statements, item 6, that selected financial data, it's not applicable to a smaller reporting company. And this is one of the recent innovations that smaller companies, in order to reduce the regulatory burden on them, they don't have to report their financials. But if you kept digging down here way into the bottom of the document, you'll see that the auditor report gives up the goods, and there are all the revenues and profits are just disclosed in the appendix of the auditor report. So that would be a good way of nailing all that down. And through that, we see that they reported a net loss of nearly $5 million for 2019 and so forth. So this, a couple other things just to look at is like timing. They went and borrowed $5 million right before the pandemic blew up. So they went into pretty heavy debt. So they were already struggling, and then they sold some stock in March and April and so forth. So I thought this was kind of a neat example of how to, walk through a particular company that is got the Paycheck Protection loan, and we can, kind of build a broader narrative around it with just some of this material, and give you some really good, sharp questions to ask when you call up the company. I wanted to move now to a couple things, some specialized research tricks that will help you localize Edgar. Let me see if there's, I think I got another
question, Rob.
Yeah, sure, Ben.
So I did a story last year, and I looked up the company in Edgar and saw that the accounting firm said they had questions about it as a going concern. And then the firm sent me a statement saying, oh, well, that's common for young companies.
Yeah, that's garbage. Yeah. Yeah,
I figured it might be, but they were very insistent that look, they have to take on a lot of debt early on in the life cycle of the business, and so they had a big, long explanation for why that might be.
So in that case, it's getting independent analysis and unbiased analysis on corporate research can be a little difficult if you're working the traditional Wall Street sources. I mean, some people will cough it up. But it's always good to talk to academics who don't have, any money in the game, and calling an accounting professor and, or, people who have done this for a while, and you can get that perspective. It's amazing this sort of stuff they try to push. Like Facebook was always, really hammering on the tech reporters to report the operating earnings, which showed a positive effect. But, on a net basis, on net income, they were losing money hand over fist after their initial public offering because of the significant tax burden, And so it takes a lot to sort of plow through the spin. It's kind of an endless job. So this customized Edgar search, this is something way in the back bowels of the Edgar system. And it allows you to do these kind of intense searches using specific tags in the Edgar filings. There we go. All of these documents have been constructed to do very specific searches. So you can search by type, by form type, by zip code, by city, by state, by business address, and you can construct a pretty sophisticated search by doing all this. So what I've done here is I constructed a search of the Edgar tag saying state equals Arkansas and form type being 10K. Searched that and gave me a list of all publicly traded companies that filed an annual report so far this year. And we got, Walmart and JB Hunt, and then these more obscure companies like Lenovo. So this was a good way for me just to kind of get a sense of, who the big players were in a particular state. You can take this to another level and, search by zip code. And so I have all filers that pop up in your particular zip code. So this is how I was able to pick out the little needle of Lenovo out of the haystack of the paycheck protection loans. It was kind of a sort of a stupid and ridiculous strategy, but I had, a list of current public companies, and I just sort of keyword searched against the spreadsheet for Arkansas recipients of paycheck protection and came up with Lenovo and probably a pretty good story. So that is a really neat strategy. I would recommend you experiment around with this. Especially searching the zip code in your particular area. You can truncate the zip code and let's see if I can do that here.
Could you say again how we get to it on the site?
Sure. So it's buried in the site. And so I've provided the link here in the presentation.
Oh, I see.
So the customized search link brings up this. And it gives you nothing, right? So I'll say like zip equals 72701. So let's see all the fat cats in my neighborhood. There we all are. So what we have here are these fairly sophisticated large investors filing Form Ds, and that can be a fairly significant stake in a private company. So it's a back-end way of gaining some information about a private company to see if an investor has gone in that way. And so 21 documents this year in my little hometown of Fayetteville, Arkansas. So this type of strategy, searching by Form D in a particular community, is one of the pro tips my former students are doing at the business journals to stay in touch with big, major investors in Baltimore and so forth. Does that help with how to use this customized search thing?
Yep.
Yeah, so play around with it. It's a neat thing to do. And I give a couple examples of, how to pull up all the Pittsburgh companies and so forth. And I talk again about how I did the Innovo thing. So yeah, man, this time flies here. So I'm gonna just give you an overview of some of my search techniques for private companies. This comes out of a lecture I've been doing for a while called Who Owns My Dive Bar? It was based on a little bit of curiosity about who owned my dive bar when I lived in Maryland. And you can get the entire presentation with great photos of students in there. But the point of this whole private company research strategy is this: I've developed this, what I call a staircase method. And Mark talked about it a bit. You get an address off the Secretary of State's, registration website, and you get a name from a property filing, and you begin to kind of stitch together this information using, you can use Google searches, but you really have to do quite a few specific searches within complex government databases that are not very user-friendly, and I'll talk about that. The main question in trying to search a private company is really trying to learn, where does the business intersect with the government? That's the easiest pathway in to research private companies, is when they intersect with the government. A restaurant with its health inspection, a barber with its occupational license, a real estate developer and a lien, filed against him. You can find paper. The paper, can unlock other things. So that's, you need to dig in a lot of different places to do this, but that's how you go. So, we're doing this right now on a project with my students, looking at evictions and get the names, get the addresses, get the owners, property tax records, and so forth. One of the basic things here is you want to make sure you get the name spelled correctly. And while I don't have access to the paid version of Dun & Bradstreet, the public site will at least talk about the different ways that companies can have their names spelled. So in Annapolis, Maryland, where I used to live, there is a great bar called Ram's Head. And we can see Ram's Head is spelled with an apostrophe S and without an apostrophe here for a different location, and so forth, and then apostrophe S. This is going to matter when searching government databases. So always worth checking the details. I searched my local barbecue place, Penguin Ed's, and came up with the correct spelling. Some other business search resources. There's a very nice website here for international company searches that I came up with, and so forth and so on. For a lot of these examples that I have here involve Maryland businesses and Maryland charter records. And the same concept I found really applies to other states. There may be slightly different databases, but to get a to look for a business charter, you can, business entities search here in the Maryland Secretary of State's site. Typed in the dive bar name. There it is, Harold Harbor Hideaway. And we get the this owner name, lived in the neighborhood, and the filing history, certificate of renewal. You get that downloads, and we can take let's see if this pops up in a different window. Nope, just downloads. Okay, so we'll just skip on that. So that's one way, you get the names off the charter records, and then going into the property search records, we can find out the assessed value of the property, and then through the tax collector if they have any late taxes. It's really important with each one of these are all like legacy databases. They probably go back to the invention of the wheel and so forth. They're very antiquated, and they don't have the sophisticated search engines or algorithms of Google and so forth. So you're kind of locked into some really archaic, almost 1970s type Boolean search strategies. So pull up the help files on the individual website and look through the different conventions on how they want you to search. It will make a big difference in the time amount and the success in your searches and so forth. Let's see here.
Just a heads up on time, Rob. We have just like 6 or 7 more minutes. So if I know you're near the end of there, but if there are questions that all of you have, you throw them into chat and we can kind of work through any of those, or if anybody wants to shout out a question.
Yeah, I'm sorry to rush through this. I just wanted to give you a big, sort of a big overview of how this works. I think a lot of the stuff here is going to be good jumping off point for your own exploration. Any questions at this point?
It's Ben Marcus. Can you go back to the Edgar search where you had form type 10K? I'm having trouble getting that search to work for me.
So back here, in the customize search. Oh yeah, I see. So yeah, Ben, you see this thing? Form hyphen type.
Okay.
It's it's one of these things. It's incredibly anal, right? So like for Maryland.
And then a hyphen between 10 and K. That was the other problem.
Yeah. Yep. And so it works for Maryland there too.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, man, it's a really great tip. I forget exactly. It must have been like 2 in the morning. I was messing around with Edgar and I came up with that. Like, oh, that's pretty useful. One thing on the business practices, look at the discrepancy between who owns the company and who's paying the taxes, and ask, why, if there are 2 different people or 2 different entities. That can give you a nice entree. Looking at deeds, if there's a lien, then you might have some litigation. But this all presupposes you're going to do a litigation research as a basic task. I didn't talk about legal research, but I mean, old lawsuits can unlock so many details about private companies. It's just, for the book that I wrote, I found a lawsuit from like 1980. And I go into the appendices and this thing down in the New York court system, the New York State court. But there's a friggin' tax filing for the company. This is a private company. There's a friggin' tax filing. It's like, wow, that's amazing, Also run the company through the local business press. The American City business journals are excellent sources of revenue. The trade press for any particular industry. really good sources of information. If you have a friend at a university in the business school, get tight with them and see if you can use their Bloomberg terminal. Bloomberg aggregates a whole crap load of material. And that is it's one of the first things I did when I got here, is got tight with the business school and got my access to a Bloomberg terminal, you know. The rest down here in the, let me just flip and share the spreadsheet to the paycheck protection.
And Rob, we do have a couple of chat questions that have
Yeah,
come in, if you're able
sure.
to look at those.
Let's, what do we got here, Chris? Let's see, chat questions.
So,
you can explain how to use the UCC filings. Okay, let me, so I'll get to the UCC, but one thing, this NAICS code, you may not be aware, this is a way of categorizing businesses through a standard federal system that will describe industries and gets into fairly granular areas. So I have a link in the presentation on how to look up NAICS codes, and then you can make claims like, you know, landscapers and churches got, you know, so much money out of the Paycheck Protection Act, and so forth. Let me just go back here to the presentation and UCC filings. So I've done a little work on UCC filings, and just bring this up here. And let's just, that bar I mentioned in Maryland, Rams Head, search this thing. So this is a filing where a company has pledged collateral on its business to get a loan, you know. And let's see, non-certified research for the Rams Head dockside. Oops. And what it will do, the filing statement.
And Rob, if you could maybe increase your screen size a little bit,
Yeah.
we're having trouble reading.
Yeah. How's that?
That looks better for me, yeah.
Okay, great. So here is the Rams Head has borrowed from LCA Bank Corporation, and the equipment, just generically describe the equipment. So you'd have to go back a couple filings for this, but you can find out how much in prior filings, how much was borrowed and what was the collateral that was pledged. So it can give you a sense whether or not, you know, a particular company needs, you know, is in debt and what they've pledged. And it might be, if people are borrowing a lot against similar things, they could be in trouble.